My name is Kim Hartman. I have worked as a garden center manager, a landscape designer, a purchasing manager, and an educator for the last 20 years in the green industry. So I am bringing to you some experience and knowledge working in your realm, in the retail realm, in the landscape services realm. But even as importantly, I'm bringing you the expertise, the trends, the questions from our esteemed panel up here. We have Keith, raise your hand, Brian, Sierra, and Stephanie today, who are going to help give us more perspective on what the emerging trends are, what the typical questions are, what those products and services are that they're looking for from independent garden centers, what products you could project you might need in 2023, 24, what the demand might be. So to give us context for that, I gave you a quiz. And that quiz has some statistics from a variety of sources. And I'm happy to share some of those reference sources. They're at the back end of my presentation today, just as you're sharing some of this knowledge with your teams, with your staff. Now, I don't have to tell you that demand has grown. However, where has it grown? How has it grown? Who is gardening now? So that's what we want to talk more about. How many of you were in my program this morning? Okay, a couple of you. One of the trends that was very noticeable as I looked at this research, as I looked at this data, was how our population of gardeners is changing. It used to be our average gardener was between 55 and 60 years old, a woman who had been vegetable gardening, flower gardening, perennial gardening for her entire life. She was now having some mobility issues. Her knees, her back hurt. It was harder to do some of that type of gardening. That was our traditional customer, even as recently as 5 years ago. Does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. We all got nervous as retailers, wholesalers, growers, landscapers, that our demand for our services was going to age out. Because those younger people were raising families, they were going on vacations, they weren't spending as much time in their yard, or they were downsizing or outsourcing, getting their landscaping services. What happened? They stayed home. It sounds awkward to say, but we are one of the few industries that grew and thrived because of the pandemic, right? Yeah. All right. Let me pass out the quiz to those of you that just joined us. We're doing a little quiz. Go ahead and get started on that. There you go.
Is it a pop quiz?
Give it your best shot.
Okay.
There you go. And we will go over the answers together. 18 million more people gardened in the last 2 years than before. 18 million. Sometime in May, it probably felt like they were stampeding your garden center, right? What we know is there was an increase among the millennials of 69%. So those people in their 30s with young families, buying their first home, educating their kids at home, working from home, came back into our garden centers. They started growing things from seed. They started doing it as a family activity. But the number one reason that people came back to gardening was mental health. Healing their head and heart as they were dealing with illness and isolation and job loss and all of the consequences of the pandemic. So it was giving them a respite, a solace, something to do with their family, which was the number two reason why they came back to gardening. Now, how many of you, as part of surviving the pandemic in your garden centers, sold more things curbside or online? Did you do some of that, at least initially? Mm-hmm. Online sales of gardening goods in the last 2 years, online, increased over 100%. They doubled in 2 years. People shopping online for seeds, for bare root plants, for gardening tools. 1 in 3 of those people were frustrated that they couldn't get what they wanted. Seed companies were sold out. Gardening tools were sold out. Waiting lists for plants online. So good news, bad news, that sent them back into brick and mortar stores. That sent them to you because you still had some of those resources that you could use and offer to them. And oh, by the way, educate them as part of the process as well. So good news, more people gardening. However, did we have enough plants? Do we have enough staff to sell those plants? Did we have enough pots? Did we have enough soil to do all of those things? It's amazing the innovation that happened and how we adapted and how we educated. And now we're looking ahead to 2023 and deciding, how much should we buy? How much should we grow? Mortgage rates are up 2%. Gas prices are up $2. You know, the Federal Reserve is still doing more. How do we plan for 2023? I polled a lot of you today as I was walking around the show floor and talking to other people. People are pulling back 5 or 10% going into next year. Now, that's 5 or 10% of something that went up 20 to 30%, right? So it's just trying to predict what that demand and what those needs are. So let's go through some more of the answers, okay? Here we go. What percentage of Americans garden? How many of you got this one right? 55%. Over half of the population in the United States gardens. 170 million people garden. I have a granddaughter who's almost 3. She gardens. She is in there in the soil. She is teasing the roots open. She is watering plants. They start young. My 83-year-old mother is still gardening with bad knees, back, and heart because of all the value that it adds to it. Now, I'm going to turn this over to the panel for a minute. Why do you garden? Who wants to jump in?
Why do I garden personally, myself? Oh, I can't. I gotta have the dirt under my fingernails. I mean, like most of us in here, I mean, we've probably been doing this for a very long time. I started back in 1979, and there's just no more fun and joy and peace that I can get than just being out in my garden. And I spend, every waking hour I can out there, for me personally.
Do you all need to see that as Garden Center team members and hear something like that when you are getting those demanding, tough customers, those tough situations, and hearing and reminding you, this is why we do what we do? What else? Sierra, why do you garden?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like we discussed earlier today, I think in your other presentation, kind of the emotional aspect. I know when I go and pick up my plants, I do it because I love it and I love looking at it, and it's rewarding, and it makes me feel good. So I think that's what a lot of people come for.
Keith?
When I walk outside, I go to my Adirondack chair in the backyard, and it's what's around me, and I sit there and look around at it and like to tinker with different things in the yard. So I'm not so much, I don't necessarily consider myself a gardener, but I have my little peaceful place in the world that I try to take care of.
Is that gardening?
Yeah.
Steph?
My perspective, I'm a middle school teacher. I'm entering into my 33rd year here in a couple of weeks. And one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give to the parents of my students is to have their kids take care of something. So when they're not responsible to chores or activities are due, I'm like, get your kid a plant. And they're like, well, why would I get a kid a plant? Give them a plant. They have to take care of it. And it's something that they see it grow, and the spider plant that gets the baby, and then we transplant this and we propagate that. And it's part of being part of that cycle. So I have plants throughout my classroom. We took bleacher boards from our middle school gymnasium, and my husband made us a solid plant box that's become a raised bed for us, that in the midst of this, of planting flowers and seeing and bringing the butterflies and the birds and that sort of stuff, and being part of a cycle of things. And I have a number of my students that now tend to plants, and my classroom is filled with plants from a house plant point of view, but it was a place for them to start and then for them to understand where the food comes from. So putting that agriculture program into our school system to know that this is all part of caring for, doing, and we live on the state line out in the country of like, what's all that in the field, and explaining all that part of the process, not just, the plants. So.
Awesome. How many of you, and I don't know if you still do, have given tours or programs for youth in your garden centers? Are you doing it again now? Did you start again?
Please do it.
I know some garden centers did it. I mean, the garden center I worked at for 15 years, my month of April, and this is in the midst of gearing up for the season and doing landscape design and all that, I spent 3.5 hours every day doing middle school tours. 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. And they were there for about 90 minutes apiece. And we did a scavenger hunt around the garden center. Their science teacher worked on the curriculum with me, having to fill it out. And yes, just like Steph said, they went home with a tomato plant that they potted up. They had to touch soil. They had to get their hands dirty. And this science teacher was great. She's like, okay, you've got 12 weeks. You're going to document the growth, the height, the amount of water, the amount of light every day for those 12 weeks. If your tomato dies, you're coming back to Countryside where I worked and getting a new one. And you're going to start again, and you're going to keep it alive and keep going. We named the plants. You want to see animated middle schoolers naming their plants, planting the plants, being delicate with the plants or not so delicate with the plants, and working through that. We would have them come back in later in the summer and show us the tomato they harvested, and show us and tell us stories. And oh, by the way, they brought their family and their grandparents too. Good for business? You bet. But we've done something of a higher calling and a higher purpose, educating our future generation about gardening. So I hope we can all get back to that. Number 2, $48 billion with a B, billion. How many got that one right? All right? This is a big, big industry. And it's not just the plants, it's all the non-green goods, the things without roots, all of the tools, the accessories, the outdoor decor, our outdoor rooms, our outdoor furniture, our lawn care. The good news is we're doing more for our wildlife and our pollinators in the process. The monarch butterflies have been amazing for us all, right? You can take that same native plant in your garden center and say this is a pollinator plant. It sells twice as quickly, and you can charge more money for it, right? It's about branding and promotion and educating the public. All right, average household. How much do they spend in a year? 503. How many of you have got that one? Okay. That increased significantly. And I like that in combination with the second question. If you're a vegetable or fruit or herb grower, that your average garden yields $600 in produce. So people will ask, is it cheaper to raise your own vegetables? What would your answer be? Maybe in the long run. Otherwise, it's the most expensive tomato you ever had, but it's the best because you grew it yourself. What I do know from the same statistics, though, only 1/3 of those gardeners are growing food, any type of vegetables, fruit, or herbs. I think we still have a lot of opportunity in our industry. And I'm going to have our panel talk about this. The point of entry for a lot of our young people, succulents, houseplants, and herbs. And yes, there's that other herb too. That's what's bringing people into gardening. Some of those are a lot easier to do than others. How many of you have killed a succulent? Yes, killing it with kindness. And we try to train and teach our customers how to do that. But each of you tell me a little story about that first plant, or a plant that has special meaning to you. Brian has one, I can see.
Well, I actually have one right now. It's an old jade. Actually, 2 of them. They're kind of like twins.
Oh.
I'm guessing probably somewhere in the range around 30, 40 years old. I didn't grow it that entire time, but it's one of those centerpieces inside next to a big old window, and I almost killed it when I first moved to Chicago, overwatered it. because you know jades don't like a lot of water. And I'm from the West Coast, I should know better. But yeah, it's just a really, really fun plant. And whenever anybody comes to the house, it stands about probably 4 feet tall, and it has a trunk on it about like that, right? And so a lot of people comment. It looks like a bonsai.
That's amazing.
It's just a lot of fun, and I hope I don't kill it.
How about the rest of you? A favorite plant?
Mine, I would speak to a monstera. I have 2 daughters and a son, and my 2 daughters in their 20s have taken to this whole, we can grow something in a college dorm room, and that, so my daughter has since propagated and is trying with some leca and this and that. We're learning words, and they invest. They will go find this exotic plant and spend the $25, $30 to be like, woo, and put it on some Instagram follower page sort of a thing. So that stuff matters. It got my kids into it just by influencers saying, we have plants and they're cool with that. So don't underestimate the social media advertisement of some of this, because it's brought a number of monsters in my house.
There's a recent statistic of the millennials. 7 out of 10 of them consider themselves a plant parent. So that makes Stephanie a plant grandparent. Right. Think of the marketing you can do with that. Hello, how fun is that? And people buying accessories and new pots and new food and all those things and taking all the pictures. So, Sierra, what about you?
Sure. I really agree that houseplants are becoming way popular. I know I'm in college currently, so I've seen a lot of little plants in dorms. Ironically, I don't really have one in my dorm, but I do have an air plant at home. It has little, curly spikes growing off of it. I got it about 2 years ago. My parents and I were looking at a greenhouse in Sheboygan, I think it was, and I saw these little air plants, and I had never heard of them before. I'm like, well, that's cool. I want to try growing one. And they don't grow in soil or anything. You just stick them in a little holder. I have mine in the living room by a big window. I probably should water it more than I do. Sometimes I forget, but you can just spray it with a spray bottle to give it some mist and soak it. I think once or twice a week is what you should. But yeah, I hope it keeps growing longer. I hope to get more too.
How many of you sell air plants? Yeah, and the containers and the apparatus that you put those air plants on, oh my gosh, nice profit margin on them as well. How about you?
I had 2 things. One, I've discovered that I'm much more successful at photographing bonsai trees than I am growing them. And the other is I have a driftwood fountain in my office at home. About yay big, but what really makes it is the different plants that you kind of put around it to kind of like grow on it. So it's one that's right there behind me in my office that I just turn around and take a look at it during the day.
That's gardening too, by the way, right? All right, let's go on to our next quiz question. I talked about this earlier. Our sweet spot right now is our 35 to 44-year-olds. Now, here's what's interesting, and I don't know if you're seeing this or feeling this. Those groups are going back on vacation, aren't they? So they're taking some of that discretionary income. I see a lot of nodding heads that they were spending in your garden center, and they're taking their trip before school starts. They maybe did stuff in the yard. They did more remodeling. So the hope will be they enjoyed it so much and see so much return on their investment and value that they'll continue that. Now, I'm going to ask the panel, what do you think? As people have more flexibility as we've moved out of the pandemic.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges that you all have, especially if you're in retail, well, landscape too, is it's creating successes with customers. Because what I find is that for the most part, the average retailer will walk into your store and they just don't have confidence to do what they really want to do. They want to do it. They want their yard to be the best yard in the neighborhood, but they really don't have the confidence. And so it's our job to help them find that confidence and to reach out and make things happen. And they also have to realize that doesn't mean everything's going to make it. They're going to lose some stuff. I lose stuff. My neighbors come to me all the time, and they're always saying, "Oh, your yard is blah 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 blah. Nothing ever dies." No, you just don't see the stuff that dies. I kill stuff all the time, and it's okay. It's plants. I mean, if somebody loses a $30 plant that they bought at your nursery, what kind of loss is that compared to going to Nordstrom and paying $300 for a pair of shoes? And at some point they got to throw the shoes away. I mean, gardening is a wonderful thing, and in reality, it isn't as expensive as so many people think it is. So I think if we can give them those successes and help them to reach out and experiment and not feel bad when they lose something, come back and say, "That didn't work, but I'm ready for something else." Right? That's the fun. It's always evolving, I think. That's the thing, is we can make it a lifestyle.
I found when I was in the garden center environment, when you call something perennial or you call something a woody plant, there's an expectation it's going to live forever, too, even if you do everything right. And as you well know, some of our perennials, their lifespan is 3 to 5 years, if you're lucky. You plant those bulbs in the fall, and maybe if they get past the rabbits and the chipmunks and the deer, you get 2 or 3 seasons. I think part of it's educating our consumers too about lifespan. That Austrian pine that we all used to plant a bunch of and we don't anymore, it's not going to look great after 25, 30 years. You're going to need to do something different. And oh, by the way, as our climate changes and we get these flooding events and these 100-year rains that happen every 5 years now, our plant palette has to change. And it's up to us as retailers, wholesalers, and landscapers to educate the public and help them be successful to do some of that. Anything you'd add, Sierra, from your experience?
What were you wondering?
Just in terms of how to help customers be more successful.
I mean, I would agree. Educating. I think you made a good point before about educating the younger people, like the little kids. I know, Mom, if you don't mind, my mom is in charge of the kids events at our greenhouse. So I think that's super important, starting them young, taking them to the garden centers, introducing them to different types of plants, and keep learning as it goes. Keep asking questions.
House is about 25 years old. We've been in it about 15 years. I spent about 10 years on the road traveling for work and ended up with a job where I work at home, and with the pandemic was home all the time, became very, much more aware of the yard, and have just learned that things that were this big grow this big, and at a certain point they just don't look any good anymore. Trees grow, and something that was a nice sunny bed becomes a shady bed. So as a consumer, I need help because there's things that need to be either fixed, changed, replaced. And while I'd like to take vacation, I also see that I'm going to have to put some work back into that yard to get some things back the way they used to be. Used to have hostas in the side yard, and the rabbits got them. So that's one of those things. The shady bed was like this big surprise. I'm like, why is this happening? And I realized, found some old pictures of the house and realized just how much some things have grown. And so it's a different project now.
And I don't know if you find this in terms of your customers coming in. It used to be, it was new construction and you're helping people plant that first tree and the shrubs out front and maybe that vegetable garden. I spend probably 2/3, 3/4 of my time doing what I call renovation landscaping, for all the reasons Keith just talked about. I inherited this juniper or yew hedge that's 25 years old and overgrown, and this tree that's cracking and breaking or has a disease. What's next? And it can be overwhelming to our customers, and trying to help them work through that. And frankly, they will make the investment. They will spend the money. I think the other thing the pandemic did, as more consumers used our services, and I don't just mean their products, some of the services all of you offer too, whether it's planting services or landscaping services or consulting or garden coaching services, is they see the value now. I know a lot of the tree care companies, had a lot of work to do with all the storms we've been having, and people were surprised. Oh my gosh, it costs this much to take down a tree. It costs this much to come and prune or replace my landscaping. But I think we're doing a better job of communicating value to people and not just competing on price. I'll ask a question to the panel here. Why an independent garden center and not a box store?
Well, I think the most obvious one is just the expertise and the personal touch and everything that you can give a customer. I mean, I started this whole business back in, like I said, in the West Coast with an old nursery called Heinz Nursery. Many of you may have heard of them. Been around for many, many, many years. And they sold primarily to independent garden centers. And I watched the evolution of Home Depot, Lowe's, and Walmart come and basically steal the business away of the, in America. I mean, but any of you that have ever shopped one of those box stores, you know what you get when you're there. You know what, there's nobody to talk to, and if you do talk to somebody, they don't really know, and they don't really care to know. And like I said earlier, if somebody has no confidence, if they really want to do something and they don't have confidence, they want to go somewhere where they're going to know that they're going to get good advice, good plans, and help them down the road. And so, I mean, there's just, I don't think it's even a question. It surprises me that Home Depot, Lowe's, and Walmart have maintained the business that they've had as long as they've had. It just really does surprise me. And at some point, I got a feeling it just has to stop. It just can't. I mean, at what point does the American people say, I'm not going to go do that anymore. That's not working for me. I'm going to stop doing that, right? I don't know if it ever will, but I sure wish it would, right?
Steph, what about you? Why independent versus box store?
In our community, we have a local garden center of sorts, and I appreciate the customer service, the information that's there. Having somebody to go back to for support of pruning and care and that, and I like it as an experience. It's become just a couple days ago, I spent the day with my mom, and our adventure wasn't to go shopping or to go to lunch, it was to go to a garden center. And that was our outing, and neither of us had an agenda of what to buy or what we didn't need anything with that, but to roam a store that, the little things you start paying attention to, like the music in the background, the aisles that were at an angle, not straight, so I didn't feel like I was at the grocery store. I wanted to feel like I was somewhere besides the grocery store. So just the little simple touches of the color palettes, the textures, the music, took it away from I have to do this grocery Walmart shopping, and turned it into a 1-hour wander with my mom and making sure surfaces were level. She walks with a cane, sometimes a walker, so it's just some of those little things to be aware of that are convenient. The cart's at the door because mom's just going to lean on that the whole time and just toddle her way through to make it that multi-generational. And if you have the little things for the little grands that are running around, that yes, they can touch it and it's tactile and we're not chasing them away all the time, but the kids have a space to, be part of the don't break it, buy it scenario. So.
Box store versus independent.
I know when I work on projects around the house that it's going to take me 3 visits to my local box store to get everything I need, just because I never plan ahead. But if I have looking for expertise, I go to some place like the smaller one, like Ace. Now, but I do the same type thing with the stuff for the yard. So some of the tools, some of the bulk things like stuff for treating the lawn and stuff, I'll go to the box store. But again, it's the expertise. I will go to the garden center. I go to the garden center for plants. But I also look at it as an outing. Going to a garden center is actually more of a weekend outing compared to another run to a box store. So I look for events and other things that are happening, or just wander around. I know certain ones we'll stop at. But it's more than just going there to get that, that thing off the list.
then you can integrate a little coffee shop or something, and then now they're gonna come to that and sit in your plants.
I know one that's got a coffee shop.
Well, and I think that's the challenge for us in the industry. We were really getting some momentum, I felt like, in the mid to late 2010s of doing more of that education, community involvement, community gardens, activities, events, tours, that type of thing, and then obviously pandemic sort of stifled some of that. We did some Zoom education. We did some Zoom presentations. We did some things for schools online and still trying to sustain some of that. So I think we've got to get creative as we go forward, because as we talk about number 7, we need to keep the millennials. We need to keep them in our pipeline and spending money within our garden centers. They now make up 29% of all of the gardeners, the millennials. And that is a significant increase over before, because it used to be a lot more of the boomers. So tell me, I'm going to ask you this time, not just our panel, what are you doing to bring the millennials in? What you are doing differently to get that audience in your garden center? Yeah?
We recently started a TikTok account,
Nice.
which was both scary and exciting, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, within the last couple of weeks, so we've just had a few posts, but I think the technology part is something that's huge.
What about anybody else? Anything unique or different for the millennials? Yeah.
Trying to get in more like collectible plants and things like that that are a little bit more rare.
I was struck by some of the displays I saw at the show floor today, how they marketed that way, that we are collectors now. And there's something about, I want one of each of these things. And it doesn't just have to be the houseplants. I think we tend to think about the houseplants, but how many people do you know that every time a new hydrangea comes out, they want one? But we've got to be careful that we don't overwhelm our audiences either. Because, I'm going to skip ahead to 10 because as an addition to that point, of that population, so a third of our gardening population is millennial. Half of those people are not confident, to Brian's point. They are questioning their ability to keep a plant alive. Half of them. So how do we overcome that emotional reaction, that fear? I think a part of it is also educating them about what plants are likely to be more successful sooner. It was tricky because we would bring in a lot of tropical plants, including things like jasmine and gardenia and lemon trees. Are those easy starter plants? No. But are they collectible? Are they Instagram worthy? You bet. So I think it's our responsibility working with our public to help them find their way to plants that could be successful with. And then you could graduate to growing a gardenia. Any of you grow gardenia as well? I don't know. Good.
It's challenging in Colorado.
Yeah. Orchids is another one. We get these beautiful orchids in, and they're like, oh, what? They stop blooming? Oh, they don't bloom in the summer? No. And part of it's educating. It's like, oh, how do I get it to bloom again? And typically, as you know, most of our consumers are like, it must need more water.
How about the ice cube?
Yeah, and the ice cube thing, and all of that. So I think helping them understand and manage expectations so they can feel more confident and successful. All right, so I'm going to ask my panel, what can your independent garden center do? I'll start with you, Sierra, to make you more confident.
Well, in our case, we're blessed with a lot of really good people who have good expertise, especially our horticulturists. I think the general thing is just to get people who care, maybe employees who care, that really want to share their expertise with these customers who are willing to listen to them, because they're not going to want to listen to someone who doesn't want to be there, or maybe is in a store like Walmart, like we were saying before, and just educating them more and be more educated ourselves too. I know we have different departments. In our greenhouse, we have the tree and shrub department, we have the perennials, the annuals, the house plants, the store, and then our horticulturist takes care of like the herbs and veggies. So even maybe widening and making that specific, places that you can ask. So it's not super generalized. I think that would help as well.
Okay, good. Other thoughts?
A side note is I'm sitting here and thinking of your role with that. I wouldn't also, being a school teacher, underestimate getting involved with your community, with your schools we did the landscape install, or we did the whatever plants at the bank, and not being afraid to put your signage there as a relationship of we're giving back to, we're working with, and with that layer of education that could go with it. We put these here, now put it in the hands of the students at the school to care for it, or put that as a community service project for assisted living center type of thing to then educate, and now you're going to get one more layer of, oh, I got to practice here, or it maybe isn't my dime on the line, and practice and become successful at that, and then maybe now I can take this into my home and be successful with gardening.
Okay. All right, let's make sure we finish the rest of our quiz. What percentage of Americans own at least one houseplant? 2/3. How many of you are taking care of a houseplant right now? Okay. I don't know about you, and we talked about some of those favorite plants or nostalgic plants earlier. I think of my grandma, one of them. I think of African violets. I think of my other grandma. She had this huge, monstrous spider plant with 100 little spiders coming off of it. I want both of those in my house. I'm going to get emotional. For my grandkids. Because I want to tell them stories about my grandparents raising these plants and telling them how to take that little spider and propagating it and making a new one from it. I'm having more and more people come in, I want that particular peony or that particular iris or that particular oak tree because I'm trying to recreate my parents' or my grandparents' garden. So it's not just those memorial plants, it's like creating that memory garden, and it's making new memories as part of it as well. So there's really something to be said for nurturing. I am the daughter of a farmer and a teacher. So sharing knowledge and nurturing things, I think a lot of you probably have some ties to those things as well, and that's why we do what we do. What percentage of adults are growing a plan to grow edible plants? Well, a lot of people are growing that particular tomato or that pepper. More and more are growing those herbs as well that they can use. Now, interesting data that came out of the National Gardening Survey, more than half of those edible plants are being grown in containers. Not in the ground, not in raised beds, in containers. So what do you need to do and what supplies do you need to have and how do you handle growing that tomato, pepper, lettuce, cucumber? What varieties do you recommend if you're going to grow in containers? And it's not just people in small spaces, it's their way to manage disease, keep the bunnies away and do those types of things. So I think we have to watch for trends like that as well as we're having fun with it. So I'm going to turn it to our panel. Tell me more about what you're doing with container gardening.
Well, yeah, I work for a wholesaler, and now we do annuals, and then we do a national winter product as well. But we see more and more the trend on annuals and containers. It's just growing and growing and growing. I mean, one of our customer categories, interestingly enough, that is growing really strongly are people who are building container businesses within a particular neighborhood. So they're taking care of maybe as many as 100 homes. And those homes have a lot of containers around them, on the porch, in the backyard. And those homeowners are allowing somebody to come in and manage those containers 4 seasons a year. There is a huge opportunity for that. I mean, I've got customers, that's all they do. They just run around and do container business. We call them container people. because we don't know what else to call them. I mean, it's kind of a unique business, right? But, I mean, I think in the retail side, that opportunity exists, and I understand that, you know, it's probably, you have to have crews, and you have to see things differently. I remember back, 100 years ago when I was in retail, we used to have customers who bring their containers to us and have pot them, right? Well, now, they want you to come to them and just do it there. And, you know, if you had a van and you drove around and did so many containers or whatever, you know, I've got people that are doing it. Right now, I have probably as many as 7 or 8 customers that have upwards of 200 to 250 clients, and that's all they do. 4 seasons a year. Yeah.
I don't know about you, if I am walking down a street and considering whether I want to go into that particular restaurant or coffee shop, and I see 2 of last year's dead mums, and this happens, Libertyville, Illinois, you know, down, you know, on the Lake County, high-end restaurant, that's what was in their containers out front. I made a decision in that moment not to go to that restaurant.
Or you pulled the plants out.
Well, that, or you see the crabgrass growing in, and you can't help it yourself. And you know, you go into a hotel, the same thing. You go through the drive-thru at Starbucks or McDonald's, and you see. So yes, there's a huge market for that kind of thing. And how do we fit in as retailers and horticulturists to improving that? You know, I see people doing all this upgrading and remodeling inside. What does it take to do a couple pots or window boxes out front, right? And how can we be part of that and put our name on it and take credit for it? Mm-hmm. Sarah, talk to me a little bit about community involvement and how you're doing some of that.
Okay, so we actually, this fits perfectly, because we actually did an event a few nights ago at our greenhouse called Ladies Night.
Yeah.
Ladies Night in the Gardens. It was a tremendous turnout. We were very blessed. We probably had about 1,200 or more ladies come in.
Oh.
Yes. We didn't do it for the past 2 years because COVID and construction purposes. But yeah, so we had vendors come in. We have an employee that organizes all of that with the vendors. I'm not sure how many vendors were there. Maybe under 20. Okay. Yeah, so the ladies could come and shop, they could get food, we had a local food group selling food and wine tasting, so that brought in a lot of people, of course. And then we just they could shop, we gave out coupons for them to come back, which is starting now, they can come back it was starting yesterday, and pick up some free annuals with the coupon that they got.
Those extra annuals you have? Yeah.
So just, yeah, came out and have a good time. They could ask us any questions they had about our beds and tour the gardens we had. So that was a big hit. We've done that, I don't know when we started, but we've been doing it a while, every year.
It's fantastic. 1,200 people.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, it was nice. It was humbling. And we also do a fall festival, which is coming up. I think it's in the end of September through the end of October on the weekends. So we'll have pumpkins and mums. That's always available in fall. But we have hay rides on the weekends and some activities. And we also do something for Christmas. I know you were talking about containers. We actually have a Christmas container planting seminar that one of our employees organizes, where they have to sign up for that, but they have all their supplies, and I think her name's Sandy, the one who does, and Sandy kind of teaches them how to do it as they do it, and they can create their own little Christmas container.
And leave their mess at your place.
Yeah.
All those
We
pine
clean
needles.
up after. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So those are some of them.
We had an event, scarecrow building. People brought their own clothes. We had bales of straw, which we already had, and low cost activity and event. That was always a really popular one.
We used to do that too.
Did you?
I think we stopped now because it's too much.
But 1,200 people is not too much. One last question for our panel. Looking ahead, the next 12, 18 months, what's your prediction for gardening and demand? Think about it personally in terms of how Are you gonna spend the same amount of money or more on gardening, or what do you see broadly? Keith, what do you think?
I feel like personally it's going to come down some from just, I was home for 2 years and, spending a lot more time doing the projects, but I see it dropping some, but I see several years of projects ahead. Just, it's not something I feel like I can do all in one shot, so it'll be, a certain amount each year, redoing sections of the yard, dealing with some of those problems. And on an earlier question, I just wanted to say, you kind of mentioned the education and kind of pushing that. I'm probably the type of consumer who, while I could learn a whole bunch about plants and about, what to do in my yard, I don't have the time to. That's not necessarily my thing. I want to enjoy my yard. So I'm looking for help to be able to come in with a problem or come in with a situation and say, hey, how do I solve this? And get that expertise and give me the right stuff and set me on my way so that I can get back and sleep in my Adirondack chair. But I do see, it just, because of what's happened in the last few years, just more of a focus in the coming years on my yard now that I really have a sense of what's there.
Makes sense. Stephanie?
I think the continued, the events to make it an outing, to make it a event. I very often have relied on garden centers for a source of gift giving, and tying back to the novelty things or the plant that you have to continue to grow, so to continue to have that repeat service and hopefully some advertisement of this is where it's from and how, and to keep doing that. So,
Brian, what do you think looking ahead?
Well, for me personally, in our company, because we do annuals, we're seeing an increase. We think it's going to go up.
All right.
Just by nature, because annuals are not permanent. So people have experience with annuals, they have successes, they come back to them, right? So I'll change it. I'll do 2 pots next year instead of 1. So I think for us, just because of the nature of our product, we're looking at it to go up. And I'm hearing a lot about this experiences and events and things like that. My kids are all millennials. And I can tell you they flock to experiences. It's what they do.
Yeah.
And so if you can create those, you've got the millennial. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully they spend some money.
and they'll hashtag it on Instagram for you.
Yeah.
Last thoughts, Sierra? Anything?
Well, for us, I know one of our best sellers is our hanging baskets that we do combinations. My dad is in charge of that. But our specialty hanging baskets, I know those will continue to be, a hot product because they're always gone at like the end of May, especially in the past few years of COVID. And tropicals are also another one. House plants, I think we hope to expand that a little bit because I think this is the first year we got actually a houseplant section. It was either this year or last year. And then continuing to just being involved with the community. Like we mentioned before, we're a destination garden center. People come for the experience, not so much the product too, but more for the experience.
Yeah.
So I think if we just continue to do that.
Well, any questions from our audience for our panel before we wrap up for the afternoon? Yeah.
I got a horrible question. I should preface it with the fact I love this industry and I've been in it all my life. I had a garden center for 35 years. I hate to bring up this question, but the guarantee, this plant guarantee that we struggle with, any comments on that, or I'd like to see that backed up a bit, or have the customers take some ownership of that.
Well, what is your expectation going in as a consumer in terms of a guarantee?
I've never kind of gone back and I always figured it was my fault if somebody didn't make it. I put it more on myself rather than, oops, I forgot to do or lighting or water or whatnot. So I'm the consumer that's not coming back going, look at I killed
And
it.
many are.
I know. So
Many are.
I'm not a much help.
I How many of you warranty perennials? Guarantee perennials for how long?
To the end of that year.
So that growing season, so not for 12 months, for the end of the growing season. How about you?
It depends. Some of them are till October, some are a year.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else warranty perennials?
Same,
Oh,
end of the growing season,
End of the
which is
growing season.
October 31st for us.
Okay. All right. Is it perennials what you're dealing with?
Well, no, it's all of the above.
Yeah.
They're big on nursery stock.
Sure. Yeah.
So like we'll sell a hydrangea and a week later, if it didn't rain, it can come back crispy and obviously they didn't water it and we have to give them a new one.
How many of you offer planting services? Do you warranty differently if you plant it? Yes. Do you? Yes, I get both. I think there's a lot of discrepancy there too, in terms of what we do. I have started to see more and more garden centers pull back and go to 50%
I want to.
instead of 100%. Anybody less than 100%? There may be some interest. I hear you. I
I'd like
hear
to
you.
see the industry start doing that
So there's some accountability with the customer.
for the customer, yeah.
We used to get questions about hanging baskets and annuals and tropicals and houseplants and all that type of thing too. We could have every sign, every posting on the website, we could hand a piece of paper to them at the cash register. It would print on our cash register receipt and we would still get the pushback about that. So that's where some of that education comes back in again. I hear you. I hear you. There are some pulling back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions for our panel? If not, let me leave you with this thought of, isn't it great to be part of an industry that is growing,
Yeah.
that's bringing more people into it of multiple generations, and just the value and the emotional and mental health that comes from doing what they do. Now, because I said we'd be a little competitive, add up your score on your quiz. All right? How many got all 10? Anybody? 9, 8, 7. What's your name, sir?
Lucian Neal.
Congratulations, you got 7 right.
There
Anybody
were
get 2
guesses.
or less? Good for you for being courageous enough to admit. Did you learn something by doing the quiz?
Yeah.
Share this with your staff. Have some of these conversations that we just had and remind them. Sometimes we all need the reminding and hearing from our panel of why we do what we do. Okay? So thanks for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your evening. We appreciate you being here. Make sure you fill out your session evaluation form. This helps us plan for any future events and education and gives us great feedback. So if you could just take a few seconds and return that at the back. Thanks for being here.